Well, this is an article that occurred this week, and it's really fascinating about the repurposing of drugs. The headline is that men on Viagra may reduce their risk from Alzheimer's. Yes, men who take drugs for erectile dysfunction, such as Viagra, may reduce their risk of Alzheimer's, according to a massive study, 260,000 people, 250,000 people. What they showed in this study is that if you take Viagra, you were then 18% less likely to develop Alzheimer's. Now, this is very interesting, and the question is, what on earth is going on? I think it's worth also saying that Viagra was never developed for erectile dysfunction in the first place. It was actually developed as a cardiovascular drug, and then they realised there were, well, certain side effects as a result of taking Viagra, and of course it's made a lot of money for the company involved. It was actually originally there to treat high blood pressure and angina. So the question is, what is going on? What we do know is, it seems that Viagra is affecting brain cell activity. It may have some sort of neuroprotective effect on the brain. The question is, what do we learn from this, and where do we go from here? Well, joining us now is Andy Grant, who's a pharmacology educator. Good morning to you.
Good morning, David. How are you today?
Really good to talk to you. This is a huge study, and I've got it here. It was published in the Journal of Neurology, neurology.org. But again, what we're seeing here is the use of drugs, and it's a very smart thing to do, which is essentially you've got a drug that's licensed, you then reversion it, and you see how else it may behave, or indeed if it has more beneficial effects.
Yeah, absolutely right. There's a lot of interest at the moment in the idea of drug repurposing, where existing drugs that have been shown to be safe to use in humans may potentially have other therapeutic uses. And it's something that's very attractive to the drug companies because that safety testing has already been done.
So when we look at Alzheimer's, of course, it's the most common form of dementia, accounting for about 50 to 75% of cases in the United Kingdom. It's a leading cause of death. We've talked about it before. It's an absolutely devastating disease and really does rob you of pretty much everything. What we know is that it seems that it causes a build-up of protein, this beta amyloid in the brain, and you have first-hand experience of treating people with dementia with Alzheimer's, and it's a shocking disease.
Oh, it's a horrible disease. You know, it takes away people's personality, it takes away the person that the family knew. And let's not forget that women get dementia twice as often as men.
So going back to you, Andy, just in terms of this, when you read the study, which I have done, essentially what they're looking at, they're looking at the repurposing of these drugs for Alzheimer's disease. And essentially what they've shown is that given that they have such a huge sample size, there is the potential here to do something extremely promising.
Well, I think myself and a lot of other scientists would perhaps be a bit more equivocal about this, because it's not strictly a drug repurposing study, in that none of these people were actually treated to try to prevent Alzheimer's. It's more of a study looking at whether there is a correlation between people using Viagra and their risk of Alzheimer's disease. So the authors are certainly not proposing, say, giving everybody from the age of 40 Viagra. They don't have any evidence at this point that that would be beneficial. But what they are suggesting is it's something that's worth investigating further. I think, though, as coming back to what Renee was talking about earlier, if we're talking about large-scale dosing of people with Viagra to try to prevent Alzheimer's, that would be really quite a significant step, even if it were to have some effect on reducing the risk of this dreadful disease.
Well, indeed. So it's an observational study in many ways. So what they found is that it has shown to increase cerebral blood flow.
Yes.
But as you say, what it doesn't show is cause and effect. So you can't at the moment say that by taking Viagra, you reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease. So what happens from here?
Well, the hope with studies of this type is that they will maybe prompt other scientists in other groups to try to understand more about what might be happening. One of the problems we have in treating Alzheimer's disease is that despite a lot of study, we still don't really have a 100% firm view in what is causing the disease in the first place. So we're still at a point where the best ways to avoid Alzheimer's disease are through the standard advice that you and Renee would be giving to your patients as GPs, that increase physical exercise, stop smoking, reduce alcohol intake, look for social contact, things like that. And I think at this point, until we know more about these potential links between the actions of Viagra and what's happening in the brain, those more basic actions are the sorts of things that people should be doing to try to reduce their risk of Alzheimer's.
Well, I was just going to say to you, Rene, also, is there not a concern that actually this is, we talked about this earlier, about, is this a self-selecting group? Because, well, I'm trying to be, nice about what I'm saying.
I think it possibly is.
Well, men who take Viagra are probably, I don't know if they are cardiovascularly fit, but certainly maybe there are other beneficial effects to taking Viagra. I'm trying to say that nicely.
So they're definitely social, aren't they? And we know that having social contact is an important part of staving off Alzheimer's disease. They're probably slightly more active because they're thinking about having sex. That's another part. So I think there is a bit of self-selection here. They probably feel good about themselves because they want to have sex. So there's lots here. But I think what is interesting, and I'm sure that you can come in on this with me too, is that there are drugs that we use in GP now that we've known about forever. For example, metformin.
Yes.
Metformin is a drug that we use, in billions of doses around the world for diabetes. But it's turning out that it's actually quite an interesting drug in terms of anti-aging. We think that it has a role to play in anti-aging because it kind of tricks the body into thinking that it's in starvation mode, and we know that that prolongs life. We use it in women who have got PCOS who aren't ovulating because it helps you lose weight, which we know triggers ovulation, and the evidence is weak, but it does actually. I have seen 2 pregnancies with women on metformin who have PCOS. So there is a lot to be said for drugs that we use every day. We know the safety profile, so we don't have to worry about that can be used for other things.
Andy?
No, absolutely. And metformin is a great example of that, and as are the statins as well, which will also have written a lot of prescriptions for, where increasingly there's evidence that they just have more general anti-inflammatory effects that might have all sorts of beneficial effects overall. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for these sorts of drugs. It does bring us back to this question, though, about whether just large-scale prescribing of these drugs would be something that we would want within the health service, whether it may be that there is some benefit in giving everybody over 40 a prescription for statins, for metformin, things like that, but then you run into a lot of sort of polypharmacology problems where people are on multiple drugs at the same time.
So the interaction between drugs, I mean, that's a really fascinating, but also it depends on the cost of that drug. Because if it's still a patented drug, of course, the pharmaceutical company charges an arm and a leg for it. Absolutely. But if it's a generic drug and it's come off patent, then of course it's peanuts.
And of course, where we are seeing that now, and metformin, for example, wouldn't make anyone any money because it's an off-patent drug. But we are seeing the big pharma companies falling over themselves to market diabetic injections for weight loss.
Yes. And that's been in the press a great deal, hasn't it? But Andy, the question then is, for those drugs that have come off patent and are generic, whilst reformulating them or looking for other uses for them, are drug companies going to be doing that if they're not making any money?
And the short answer is no, they're not. The drug companies are only going to do things because there is a potential to make money. They have to, otherwise their shareholders will give the management a kicking. But this is a way in which they can potentially generate new income streams with the drugs. If they can get new use patents to allow them to patent the drug for a new medical disease, it does potentially allow them to get that benefit again. So I think there is still some interest from the drug companies in doing this. It may be an area where governmental support might be more useful as well. If the governments can provide more funding independently of the drug companies to look for these sorts of uses, it's potentially a way to get access to treatments more cheaply.
Fascinating stuff. Andy, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank
Andy Grant
you.
there, pharmacology educator. That was today's Sunday Surgery.